So welcome back, guys. I'm Emily.
I'm Greg.
And we are going to be discussing 2010, an Odyssey 2. A Space Odyssey 2. The second one.
2010 Odyssey 2 is the correct title.
Yeah.
Obviously, the sequel to 2001 A Space Odyssey. Mm-hmm. And we already did a review of 2001 like a year and a half ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
I think it was September of 2020.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to move on to this. This, of course, came out in about 1981, 81, I think it was, or 82. And the movie of it was made almost immediately after. Now, unlike 2001, the movie of this follows it a lot closer.
It does. There are very few deviations.
Mm-hmm. So if you've seen the movie, the book's not going to really give you that much extra. But if you've never seen either, it's worth it to read the book.
Yeah.
And then watch the movie after, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Let's give the synopsis first, and then I'll start giving opinions.
All right. So there's basically a recon mission heading back to kind of go and pick up Hal and what was the first spaceship's name? I can't remember.
The Discovery.
The Discovery. So basically going back, rescuing Discovery, seeing what other information they can gather about the big monolith that's floating outside of Jupiter. And it's the epic saga of going there and kind of a space race between America and Russia was kind of the big conflict at the beginning. Yeah.
But China, remember.
And China, yes. It was basically America versus the two major communist Cold War fears, essentially.
China crashed and burned, so
yeah.
They were out of it very quickly.
Yes. So what ends up happening is it becomes prudent for Russia, who had been kind of building their spaceship and happened to have a timeline that was a lot faster than what the Americans would be able to do in order to go over and investigate more of the monolith floating outside of Jupiter and stuff. So they just kind of made an agreement that they would be harbored in the same ship. They would send Americans over to assist the Russians and they would both do the research, and then there would be kind of this salvage mission, I guess, to pick up Hal and the Discovery and figure out how to basically figure out what information that Hal had before he was shut down, and then figure out what went wrong with Hal to prevent this sort of thing from happening in the future with other artificial intelligence. Right. So yeah, it's basically that whole saga of them kind of going there, and a lot of this book was like social dynamic more than anything. Because most of the time they're in space, they can't get the monolith, which they nickname Big Brother, to do anything. Like, they have nothing going on. But then they get this, computer, basically Floyd, who is the main character, he ends up having the artificial intelligence, Hal, he thinks, come back online and tell him that they need to get out by a certain date. Then he finds out it's actually the thought dead Dave, the astronaut who went missing, according to them, but actually became like the star child in the first book. So it's Dave, and Dave says so, and so Floyd's just like, oh, no one's gonna believe this shit. To which they did not. He went and presented himself. He's like, I am totally open to the idea that I am very crazy. And I'm out of my mind and this didn't happen. But kind of as they continue to look at their timeline and things, more evidence presents itself over time that they do in fact need to get out of there because something big and cosmic is going to happen. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at that because it kind of becomes this
surprises
big thing.
That.
Yeah, there are a lot of surprises. There's even with like the Chinese team that they tried to outrun. It was really, I loved that part because that was not in the movie, and I had seen the movie before I had read this book, and I really enjoyed that because like that whole section would have been great in a film. Yeah. Maybe not at the time that the film was made, because the graphics would have been really hard to do, but that whole thing would have been phenomenal. So that would be neat.
Yeah. You gotta, in approaching this, you gotta remember the original book 2001 was written concurrently with the screenplay for 2001. That's why there are so many differences between the movie and the book. But nobody at that time, Arthur Clarke, Stanley Kubrick, nobody conceived of it as a series. 2001 was a standalone concept. They felt they realized everything they needed to for their vision, and that was the end of it. But in the 1970s, a lot of science fiction fans were really pushing at publishers, with the boom in science fiction due to Star Wars and Close Encounters and the Star Trek revival. There were a lot of fans that were really pushing writers to continue stories. Ringworld by Larry Niven was supposed to be a one-off novel, and the fans really pushed at Larry Niven to write a sequel, so he finally did 10 years later write The Ringworld Engineers. 2001 was supposed to be a one-off thing, and the book was just a novelization, not really a book conceived by Clarke. It wasn't supposed to be continued, but people pushed and pushed and pushed, and there was money to be made, so they did. That said, 2010, both the book and the movie are very different creatures from the original 2001. They really don't stand alongside one another. 2001 was this very complete vision of the entire evolution of man, start to finish.
Yeah.
And as such, there was a lot of abstraction in that movie, a lot of symbolism in that movie, a lot of metaphor. The characters were not fully realized characters because they were just like avatars standing in for certain periods of human development.
Yes.
Human evolutionary development. And so the only character in 2001 that was really a character was not a human being. It was Hal.
Yep.
He was the only one that had any personality. The astronauts were also deadpan and didn't seem like real humans. They seemed artificial. Everybody seemed artificial in that movie. In this one, and this is, I think, the weakness of 2010, is that it's a strength that both Clarke and the director of the movie, I forget who it was.
I can't remember.
Peter Hyams, I think.
I think maybe.
Both of them made much fuller, more human characters. More, they created Haywood Floyd with a certain amount of faults and
he's kind
weaknesses.
of a tragic character in this one.
Yeah, he's kind of wimpy, I think. He's too much. In the movie, it was played by Roy Scheider, who played in Jaws, and I felt like I was watching Jaws.
Yeah,
but in space, because it was the same. It was the same character. He played the same person, and it was very much a Roy Scheider standard character. Which didn't jibe with Haywood Floyd from 2001. It was like a totally different person.
I kind of get what you're saying, but also I to a degree disagree with you, just because a lot of the situations that were happening in the book to him, there was literally nothing he could do about it. So why worry about it? I think that's the way I interpreted it, because like at a certain point his wife is filing for divorce. Because he's been gone so long and his son doesn't know him, and she's just like, this is stupid. I don't want to deal with this anymore. You're going to keep running off to space. Fine. I'm done. And so, like, he's in space. What is he supposed to do? Like, cry about
it? Exactly Scheider's character in Jaws.
Yeah.
That's my criticism here is that Haywood Floyd was rewritten to be just the exact same character that Scheider played in Jaws.
I suppose.
He was a sergeant he was the police sergeant going up against everybody that doubted him, claiming that there was this big, terrible monster out there and that they needed to do something. And here in 2010, he's in the same boat. He's out at Jupiter saying there's something crazy going to happen and we got to get out of here, and nobody's believing him. It's the same exact character, and that's the weakness.
Okay, I do see that now.
I wished Clarke and Hyams would have done a better job of looking at who Haywood Floyd was as cardboard as he was in 2001. He was still very much a diplomat, a scientific diplomat.
Yes. He was kind of part of the bureaucracy of the scientific community. He was a bureaucrat.
He was always weighing his words carefully in conversations when he was in the space station talking to the Russians that came up. He guarded his comments very carefully and very politically, and there was none of that here.
Yeah.
Here he was the Jaws sergeant, trying to raise the alarm and kind of...
He really was a backseat. He really was so backseat in comparison. Yeah. When, at least in his role. That's kind of where I'm seeing where you're coming from. The rest of it, I'm like, I still kind of see, though, the mentality of, like, why would you... If there's nothing you can do, why would you worry about it? Why would you do more? Why would you cry over it, kind of thing?
Well, I'd want to get out of there, definitely.
I'm sure, yeah. Well, he did too, especially since when he was warned, he's like, I'm okay with admitting I'm crazy, but we should probably take heed. If something out there is trying to tell us we need to do something, because, like, where did that come from?
Now, all that said, though, for the casual reader, especially somebody who really hasn't seen 2001, or you saw the movie and walked away going, what a bunch of bizarre LSD crap, you know? This book is a lot more human. It's a lot more straightforward. It's a lot easier to understand what's going on. It's told in a more traditional manner.
It gives you closure to some of the loose ends that 2001 doesn't give you closure about.
But it also, being written at the time it did, right after Voyager 1 and 2 went to Jupiter and made all of its discoveries, it was like the perfect opportunity. Because when 2001 was made, Kubrick and Clarke wanted to set it at Saturn, mainly because of the moon Titan.
Yeah.
And so Clarke wrote the book that way, but because in post-production, the special effects team were having difficulty getting the rings of Saturn to look right, at least as far as Kubrick was concerned. He was such a perfectionist.
Yeah.
They scrapped it and changed it to Jupiter.
Oh. Yep.
Now, that was fortuitous because when Voyager 1 and 2 went to Jupiter and took a look at Europa and saw that it was a moon that was totally covered with ice, and that even today, investigating that moon, there is still some speculation that there could be simple life forms on that moon.
Yes.
It's possible.
Yes.
It's within the realm of scientific possibility.
I love how they play with that in this book, too.
We have no evidence yet, but there's nothing saying it couldn't happen. There's nothing saying that it couldn't be.
Just because we don't have evidence doesn't mean it's not possible.
But, just because we don't have evidence that an asteroid's going to hit this house in the next 30 minutes doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anything can happen.
But it probably won't.
No.
So, that's where we stood. The new science about Jupiter and Europa made it really, really a great opportunity for Clarke to use that and write this book, tie it closer to the original movie, which was it was better known than the book, and change this story into something that a lot more moviegoers, a lot more readers would comprehend. Yeah. And make it a little less cerebral, a little less way out there. So it's kind of like, even though it feels like a completely different book, like somebody else wrote it, it still is the perfect complement to 2001.
It really
because of the way it moves forward.
Yes, and I think it's because of the incorporation of some of the loose ends that you get closure on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because you get some background story as to why Dave was the way he was in 2001, why he was such a deadpan character who seemed to have, like, no personality.
He still didn't in this movie.
Yeah, he didn't in here either, but you get reasons why.
Yeah, while he was transformed into something way beyond us. So.
Yeah, and a lot of it is from the perspective of this new life form, like having nostalgia and coming into this awareness that it's part of something greater. And there's like I love that it's also a combination of science and metaphysics. Mm-hmm. I love that combination, and I think that's really an interesting exploration that they did in this particular book.
Yeah.
Not that they didn't do it in 2001 because he became the Star Child, but the way they explore it more in this piece of literature, I think, was really, really interesting. Because I'm already moved on to 2061, and it is nothing like that, and I kind of miss it right now. Okay. At least as far as I've gotten in there.
But that was Clarke's forte, starting with Childhood's End and continuing with 2001 and Rendezvous with Rama is that level of hard science and wild metaphysical thought.
Yes, and the marriage of the two, because of how much science starts as theory and starts as just asking these playful questions. It just makes sense to have this other playful idea in there of what if a human could just become absolute energy? What if it basically becomes a god?
Yeah.
In a sort of way. And I really love how they play with that in this particular novel. One of the other things I thought was interesting in this one is you kind of see this turn towards, like, kind of what we're seeing now. This turn towards the wealthy and upper class being more involved in the scientific community for the sake of leisure and luxury. And you see it even more as you go throughout the series, because I'm already experiencing it even harder in 2061.
Yeah.
But one of the particular ones was Disneyville.
Okay.
That chapter really, like, was the kind of turning point where you start seeing this upper class of person who has now moved to Epcot. And Epcot has finally become what Disney had intended it to be, which was a scientific intentional community. And so, like, there's an entire chapter called Disneyville where basically Dave's mom lives there.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like you start seeing this shift towards people who are the who's who of the scientific community, which in Dave's mom's case, she just was a fluke where because Dave passed away, she was given all these opportunities because he was an astronaut and went missing in space and nobody knows what happened.
Yeah.
So she had all these, like, unlikely opportunities just because her son went missing in space and nobody knows where. But you kind of start seeing the shift that these who's who in a society kind of are living in Epcot. Yeah. And starting to kind of go into this intentional scientific community. And so you start seeing some elitism in the scientific community. And we're kind of starting to see it now with, like, Jeff Bezos went into space and is becoming a part of the scientific community, even though he is a guy with a lot of money. And you're starting to see that trend in this book. And I just thought it was super relevant to what we're seeing now, whereas, like, the space race is no longer about, I mean, it's still about the research, but now we're seeing an entirely different class of person where it's really not all about the scientific reasons behind it. Now it's starting to kind of become like a luxury thing. And I just think that's so interesting how the book started presenting that even in here and how we're now seeing it happen in real life. So the predictions. I love sci-fi writers that predict things.
I also love rereading this right now. I love the perspective on the political climate and the scientific climate of the early 1980s. This book is very much a product of its time.
Yes.
The dynamic, because, you know, the Russians are not Russians, they're Soviets. It was Soviet Union at that time. And the Soviet, you know, we were in competition with the Soviet Union in the space race. And so the people that are on the ship that Floyd hitches a ride on, they're from the Soviet Union. And they're very much in the early 1980s. It still was was really, really uncertain if the U.S. and Soviet Union would continue to stand off, or if the situation between the countries would devolve into nuclear war.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of those politics that are kind of behind the scenes in this story, driving certain aspects of the story. Clarke was very much involved in both NASA and the Soviet space program. He was good friends with like Andrei Sokolov, who was one of the star astronauts of the Soviet program, and he consulted with NASA, and he knew all those people. He was very intimately familiar with all of the top scientists in space science in the 1970s, 1980s. And so he saw that there was, in what he was dealing with, there was this level of cooperation that was completely different from what
politically was going on.
Governments were putting out publicly against each other. The scientists were talking together and cooperating with one another, and had like a little community going. And so in this story where you have the cooperation on the spaceship, but back home the governments
everybody's at arms.
About to blow each other up. That was very real for how it felt to just live in 1982.
And like the way the characters too deal with it, where it's like, if there's a home to go back to, because they realize that their governments are so at odds with each other. Like, I mean, we could go back home, but will there be a continent there after a nuclear fallout? Maybe, but is it livable? And they kind of bring that up on and off jokingly with each other, try to like ease that tension in their own minds, that like, what if there's nothing to come home to? And
that's something a lot of people won't catch who just watch the movies, is that if you read the book 2001, at the very end, the Star Child comes back to Earth and is looking at the Earth, and he's seeing the missiles launching, and he stops them.
Yeah.
So that whole political background in 2010 is tying into the very end of the book for 2001.
Yes.
Elaborating on how 2001 ultimately ended.
Yeah. I think this was just such a great read. I want to put it on the Top Tales list.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'm sure, like, I immediately jumped from this into 2061 because I happened to have it from a thrift store copy I had. I just didn't have this one, and Greg picked it up for me. So then I was able to read through, but I have a feeling this whole series is just going to end up on the Top Tales list, just from the way things are going, because it's so interesting how they all complement each other. I don't want to treat them as like separate books, because they are such a big culmination of the same story. But we'll see. 2061 might shock me, but
yeah, I haven't read 2061 or 3001 yet, though I have them both. That's for a future video for us.
Yes,
to do that together.
We plan to get through all that. So
finish this series.
Yeah.
And in pointing out the big differences between 2001 and 2010, it's not like I'm saying that 2010 is in any way bad.
It's just different.
It's different.
Yeah.
It has a different tone. If it had been written as a continuous, consistent series, you would expect a lot more continuity. But the fact that it was never intended to be a series, I think you got to kind of give Clarke a pass on that. In doing a really good job of taking something that was extremely controversial and very difficult, and continuing it in a way that people would get. And wouldn't continue to walk away scratching their head. This guy's on drugs.
Yeah. Which we're still not totally sure.
Well,
you got to have a little touch of crazy, I think, to be a writer in general. Like, and I mean that in like the most loving way possible. Like,
yeah, I don't know about that much about Clarke if he ever did do drugs, but he was a very, very intelligent, very level-headed, very straightforward type of person.
Science.
Yeah, he was a typical scientist engineer coming out of the 1940s.
Yeah.
Stanley Kubrick is the one that was probably on drugs at the time.
True. Very true. Very true. But yeah, with his perfectionism, I wouldn't be surprised if he was on drugs, because like that feels like it's a condition by that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, So definitely, if you've read 2001 and enjoy it, this is a lovely compliment. Go ahead and read the second one. If you have not, go read both of them because they're both great in their own right, even though they feel so different. It is such a great compliment. So definitely, huge props. Loved this one. This was good. Enjoyed it a lot.
So yeah, we took a break from our short stories to do this one. It's not a long book. It's an easy to read book too.
Yeah, it's only about what?
The writing style is kind of like H.G. Wells, very easy to read and not over your head. Yeah,
this is a paperback. It's kind of small. It's about 300 pages. If you get a hardcover copy, it's probably only about 200. I mean, it's a real fast read.
But it's set in pretty large type and like I say, the style is an easy read. I mean,
it practically tells itself. And the chapters are short, so you feel like you're making a lot of progress. And you are, because they're so short. But it makes it such an easy to, like, bite off in small bits book. So for a busy lifestyle, too, these are really great books.
Yeah.
So,
go read that and like and subscribe us to get more of our short stories or the other 2 volumes in the series and whatever else we come up with. We got to do Harrow the Ninth. That's coming up.
Yes, we're working on that one in February. So excited. So and we will see you guys next time. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.